Let's talk about Argentina.
Argentine President Alberto Fernandez.
Argentina united, facing its problems together.
They came to express their anger.
Now, Argentina has been in economic difficulty for years.
Argentina has cycled through economic crises for decades.
There is no political future if we don't build on and strengthen every day the things that unite us.
Argentina is in a very bad position right now. Inflation has soared past 100%, and protests have erupted as people demand solutions to the ongoing crisis. But how did a country that was once among the wealthiest and most prosperous in the world fall so far? You see, not so long ago, Argentina was one of the wealthiest and most prosperous nations in the world. In the early 20th century, it was among the top 10 countries based on GDP per capita, with a strong industrial base and a thriving agricultural sector. Buenos Aires, the capital city, was known as the Paris of South America, and the country was seen as a shining example of economic growth and development. But as often happens with success stories, things started to go downhill. Political instability, corruption, and economic mismanagement began to take over, and Argentina's once rosy economy began to fade. Inflation and debt transformed the country, and now it is on the edge of economic collapse. And now you may think, Argentina is not the only country with economic problems due to the last events, such as the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. But what is happening now in Argentina is a special case of econogenocide. Maybe you are not familiar with this term, so let me explain. Econogenocide is a term that refers to the severe economic harm and problems that can occur when governments or others make poor economic decisions that harm large groups of people. For example, imagine a country where the government spends a lot of money on things that aren't really necessary, like fancy buildings or expensive cars for politicians. The government might also borrow a lot of money from other countries or international organizations and promise to pay it back later. But over time, the government spending gets out of control, and it becomes harder and harder to pay back the loans. As a result, the value of the country's currency might start to drop, which can make it harder for people to buy food, medicine, and other things they need. The government might also start to cut back on social programs like education and healthcare, which can make life even harder for ordinary people. In some cases, this can lead to a full-blown economic crisis with mass unemployment, widespread poverty, and other forms of suffering. So econogenocide is a term that highlights the fact that poor economic decisions can have very serious and even deadly consequences for large numbers of people, and even kill an entire nation's economy. Now, what has to do this with Argentina? Well, to find the answer, let's take a short look back into Argentina's history. In the beginning, Argentina emerged as an independent country in 1816. At that time, agriculture was the backbone of its economy. The vast fertile lands favored exports of staples such as grains and beef. By the late 19th and early 20th, an influx of European immigrants boosted the population and workforce, leading to rapid industrialization. But starting with 1930, things started to go from bad to worst. You most probably heard about the Great Depression, and to understand better, let's play an imagination game. Let's you are living in Argentina during the 1930s and 1940s, and you run a small business selling clothes. During this time, the world was going through a tough economic period known as the Great Depression. Many countries, including Argentina, were hit hard by this period of economic downturn. The Great Depression caused many people to lose their jobs and made it difficult for businesses like yours to make money. As a result, the demand for clothing decreased, and you had to lower your prices to try to make sales. This made it difficult for you to make a profit and pay your bills. Then, in 1939, World War II began. Argentina tried to stay neutral during the war, but it still had an impact on the country's economy. Argentina's main export at the time was beef, but many countries involved in the war, like the United Kingdom, could not afford to buy it because they were focusing their resources on the war effort. This caused a decrease in demand for Argentine beef, which hurt the country's economy even more. To make matters worse, in 1942, Argentina's government passed a law called the Law of Economic Unity. This law made it difficult for businesses like yours to import goods from other countries, which made it hard to get the materials you needed to make clothes. It also made it difficult for people to travel in and out of the country, which hurt tourism and other industries. As you guessed, living there in these conditions would be very tough, and the sad part is that was the reality for many people. However, after the war, Argentina started to recover slowly, but the government was spending a lot of money on social programs and infrastructure, which caused high inflation rates. In the 1970s, Argentina experienced political instability, and in 1976, there was a military coup. This means the military took over the government and removed the elected leaders from power. After the coup, the military government implemented policies that hurt the economy. They cut spending on social programs and infrastructure, which led to job losses and hurt the economy. The government also borrowed a lot of money to finance its spending, which led to high levels of debt. They fixed prices on goods and services, which made it hard for businesses to make money. They also implemented strict controls on currency exchange, which made it difficult for businesses to import and export goods. All of these factors combined led to a deep recession in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Many businesses closed, and people lost their jobs. The government also continued to spend beyond its means, which led to high inflation rates. The thing is that there is not just one or two reasons for Argentina's current economic problems. However, there are some specific factors that contributed to the collapse of the economy. In the 1970s and 1980s, Argentina experienced economic decline and implemented many reforms to try to revive its economy. These changes included shifting towards an economy that encouraged foreign trade and investment, as well as privatizing state-owned industries. This was in line with what other nations, such as Chile, Mexico, and Southeast Asia, were doing. According to Martin Feldstein, the aim of these changes was to boost trade and increase demand for the peso to strengthen the currency. However, Argentina took it a step further than other countries by pegging the peso to the US dollar at a 1-to-1 exchange rate and allowing people to freely convert pesos to dollars. This policy was supported by the country's central bank, the currency board system. Argentina had a new president, Carlos Menem, and Prime Minister Domingo Cavallo, and a plan to achieve strong economic growth. The country needed to increase its exports in order to generate foreign exchange earnings, to pay off its mounting international debt, which required earning more from exports than was spent on imports. However, the 1-to-1 peg between the peso and the US dollar made Argentine products more expensive compared to those from other countries, making it harder for Argentina to compete internationally. To address this issue, Argentina needed to increase production faster than wages to lower the prices of its goods relative to those of other countries. However, labor laws and union pressures prevented the further reduction in production costs that Argentina needed to be competitive globally. Argentina found itself in a difficult situation. The 1-to-1 convertibility law prevented the necessary adjustment to lower the current account deficit, but the mandate that all pesos be backed by the US dollar meant that Argentina could not create more pesos without sufficient backing. As the dollar grew in strength against other currencies, the peso also grew in strength, leading to a decline in Argentina's competitiveness worldwide. The terms of trade were also working against Argentina as the prices of imported products were higher than those of exported products. Argentina faced increasing current account deficits, which reached almost 5% of GDP, leading to foreign debt. The country had low private savings rates, which reduced its source of investments, and the central and provincial governments had budget deficits, contributing to the growth of Argentina's foreign debt. The government was unable to control spending and tax evasion, particularly at the provincial level. A constitutional law requiring revenue sharing did not do enough to curtail the provincial deficits. As the debt increased, the interest rate that Argentina was forced to pay foreign creditors rose, further accelerating the growth of the foreign debt and making default inevitable. To reduce current account deficits without a massive recession, knowledgeable Argentines and foreign investors knew that the peso needed to be devalued. The convertibility law allowed consumers to shift pesos into dollars, and then take the dollars out of the country, which increased the need to devalue the peso. Argentina received a loan from the International Monetary Fund in 2001, which gave a temporary boost, but in January 2002, the peso was significantly devalued. The reason for Argentina's delay in devaluing the peso earlier than it did is a common question. The Argentine government was hesitant to devalue the peso due to two main reasons. Firstly, there was a fear that devaluing the peso would cause a return to high inflation, which had previously caused the economy to collapse. Secondly, there was concern that peso devaluation would have a negative impact on households and businesses in Argentina, as they had significant amounts of dollar-denominated debt. Devaluing the peso would make the outstanding debts more expensive, and this could lead to widespread bankruptcies and defaults. The central and provincial governments would also be affected by this problem, as they had a substantial amount of dollar-denominated debt owed to foreign creditors, which would be more challenging to repay after the devaluation. Lastly, there was always hope that the situation would just eventually improve, given some time. The large U.S. trade deficit created hope that the dollar might decline sharply relative to the yen and the European currency, making Argentine products much more competitive internationally. But it did not happen. In fact, the dollar and therefore the peso continued to strengthen in 2000 and 2001. During the 2007 to 2008 recession, Argentina's economy was affected by the global financial crisis. The country had already experienced a major economic crisis in 2001 to 2002, so it was vulnerable to external shocks. The recession caused a decline in international demand for Argentina's exports, leading to a decrease in economic growth and rising unemployment. The government responded by increasing public spending and implementing policies to protect local industries, but these measures increased the budget deficit and inflation. The recession ended in 2009, but Argentina's economy remained fragile and heavily reliant on government intervention. After the recession, Argentina's economy started to recover. However, there were still some underlying problems with the economy. One of the main issues was that Argentina continued to have high inflation, which made it difficult for people to afford goods and services, and also made it hard for businesses to plan and invest in the long term. In 2018, Argentina's economy took a turn for the worse, with the country entering a recession that lasted until 2019. This was partly due to a drought that affected the agricultural sector, as well as a global economic slowdown that affected many countries around the world. Additionally, Argentina's currency lost value against the US dollar, which made it harder for the country to pay back its debts. To try and address these economic problems, Argentina turned to the International Monetary Fund for help. In 2018, Argentina received a $57 billion loan from the IMF, which was one of the largest loans in the organization's history. However, many people in Argentina were critical of the government's decision to take on this loan. They argued that the IMF's conditions for the loan would hurt ordinary people and make it harder for them to make ends meet. There were also concerns that the loan would increase Argentina's debt burden and make it harder for the country to recover in the long term. Unfortunately, just as Argentina was starting to recover from the recession, the COVID-19 pandemic hit in early 2020. This had a major impact on the country's economy, as businesses had to close down and people lost their jobs. Argentina implemented strict lockdown measures to try and contain the spread of the virus, but this had a further negative impact on the economy. Recently, the war in Ukraine has added another layer of complexity to Argentina's economic struggles. The ongoing conflict has disrupted global markets and increased prices for essential commodities like energy sources and food. With Argentina being a primary exporter of agricultural products like soybeans and wheat, any disturbance in international trade routes could exert additional pressure on its frail economy. So, what can we learn from Argentina's economic rise and fall? There are several lessons, but 3 stand out due to their significance and impact on the country. Firstly, it was unwise to maintain such a narrow band exchange rate. The collapse of the Bretton Woods Agreement, in which the US pegged its dollar to gold and other countries pegged their currencies to the dollar, should have served as a warning. When one country experiences economic difficulties, problems arise when its currency is pegged to another country's currency. Argentina's law mandated that the peso be exchanged 1-to-1 with the dollar, leaving no room for negotiating interest rates, currency valuation, spot rates with other currencies, and other important factors essential to maintaining a stable economy. Argentina relied on the stability of another country to maintain its own stability, and this approach did not work. In addition, fixed exchange rates are prone to currency valuation issues, and are particularly vulnerable to political outcomes and external surprises that can affect investor expectations. While fixed exchange rates may work for some countries, it requires complete agreement among them, and deviations from this can lead to problems. Secondly, to put it differently, Argentina's excessive borrowing and trade imbalance, where they imported more than they exported, led to a lack of dollars in the central bank. A country needs to maintain a healthy balance in its import and export activities to sustain its currency's value in the global economy. If a country is importing more than it's exporting and lacks foreign reserves, it will eventually run out of money. In such a situation, the country may resort to printing more money to maintain a healthy supply. But in Argentina's case, the 1-to-1 peg of the peso to the dollar limited its ability to do so. The final factor that contributed to the economic crisis in Argentina was the decision to privatize many of the state-owned firms. This decision caused an unstable situation because the government lost a large amount of tax revenue as a result. Governments primarily rely on tax revenue to run a country in a healthy manner. But when these monies were not available to the hurting country, when they needed them the most, it created a serious problem. It is clear that Argentina was committing econo-genocide through its reforms, acts, and procedures, meaning that they contributed to its own economic downfall through these acts. In the case of Argentina, privatization resulted in the government losing an important source of tax revenue. This, combined with other factors such as excessive borrowing and an imbalance of trade, caused the country to fall into an economic crisis. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos. Thanks you for watching.